September 17, 1944. Arnhem, Netherlands. Temperature, 18 degrees Celsius, clear autumn skies. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery's Operation Market Garden begins, the largest airborne operation in history. 35,000 paratroopers descend from the sky to seize 9 bridges across Holland, creating a corridor for Allied armor to thrust into Germany's industrial heartland. Montgomery promises the war will be over by Christmas. Lieutenant Colonel John Frost, age 31, commands the 2nd Parachute Battalion, British 1st Airborne Division. His objective: capture and hold the bridge at Arnhem until XXX Corps tanks arrive to relieve them. The plan allows 48 hours. In his diary, Frost wrote before the jump, "The plan is bold. Perhaps too bold. We drop 8 miles from the bridge, expecting light resistance. Intelligence assures us German forces in the area are weak, demoralized remnants. But something feels wrong. The distance to our objective. The tight timeline. So much must go perfectly." By September 25, Market Garden would be history's most famous military failure, a bridge too far. Over 17,000 Allied casualties. Montgomery's gamble lost. This is the story of that operation. Operation Market Garden was conceived in early September 1944, during a moment of unprecedented Allied optimism. Paris had been liberated on August 25. Allied forces raced across France, pushing German forces back toward their borders. The Wehrmacht appeared to be collapsing. British and American commanders believed Germany might surrender before winter. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, commanding 21st Army Group, proposed a daring plan to end the war quickly. His concept: use airborne forces to capture bridges across the major rivers and canals in the Netherlands, the Maas, Waal, and Lower Rhine. With bridges secured, British XXX Corps armored divisions would drive north through Holland, bypass Germany's Siegfried Line fortifications, and thrust into the Ruhr, Germany's industrial heartland. Capturing the Ruhr would cripple German war production and potentially force surrender. The operation's codename combined Market, the airborne assault to seize bridges, and Garden, the ground advance by XXX Corps. Montgomery called it a 90% certain success that would end the war by Christmas 1944. American General Dwight Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander, approved the plan despite concerns from some officers. The operation would be the largest airborne assault in history, 3 divisions dropping to seize 9 bridges along a 64-mile corridor. Success required everything to work perfectly. Weather, timing, intelligence, and execution all had to align. There was almost no margin for error. The plan's ambition was matched by its complexity. 3 Allied airborne divisions would drop along the route. The U.S. 101st Airborne Division would capture bridges at Eindhoven and Veghel in the south. The U.S. 82nd Airborne Division would take bridges at Grave and Nijmegen in the center, and the British 1st Airborne Division, supported by the Polish 1st Independent Parachute Brigade, would seize the bridge at Arnhem in the north, the final and furthest objective. XXX Corps, led by Lieutenant General Brian Horrocks, would advance up a single highway from the Belgian border, crossing each bridge as paratroopers secured them. The timetable was rigid: XXX Corps must reach each objective on schedule, linking up with airborne forces before German reinforcements could counterattack. The furthest bridge, Arnhem, was 64 miles from XXX Corps' starting position. Planners estimated XXX Corps would reach Arnhem within 48 hours of operation start. But this assumed rapid advance, no delays, and bridges captured intact. Any setback would cascade through the entire operation. The plan had critics. Some officers questioned dropping paratroopers so far from objectives. Intelligence reports mentioned German armored units near Arnhem, but these were dismissed as combat-ineffective remnants. Polish General Stanislaw Sosabowski, commanding the Polish brigade, expressed strong concerns about the plan's optimistic assumptions. He was ignored. Montgomery and planners were confident. The Germans were beaten. This bold stroke would finish them. September 17, 1944, 1 p.m. Operation Market Garden begins. Over 1,000 Allied aircraft, transport planes and gliders fill the skies above southern England, carrying paratroopers and equipment toward Holland. The armada is so large it takes 3 hours to pass overhead. British and American paratroopers check equipment, review objectives, and contemplate what awaits. Many are veterans of Sicily and Normandy. They know combat. But this operation feels different, larger, more complex, more dependent on perfect timing. Weather is perfect, clear skies providing excellent visibility for pilots and jumpmasters. At 1:30 p.m., paratroopers begin dropping over Dutch countryside. Farmers and civilians watch in amazement as thousands of parachutes fill the sky. For the Dutch, who have endured 4 years of German occupation, the sight brings tears of joy. Liberation seems imminent. The drops are remarkably successful. Casualties are light. Equipment lands intact. Within hours, American paratroopers secure bridges at Eindhoven and Grave. The 82nd Airborne moves toward Nijmegen. Initial reports are excellent. At British 1st Airborne's drop zones near Arnhem, the landing is equally successful. But Lieutenant Colonel Frost and his battalion face an immediate problem. Their drop zone is 8 miles from their objective, the bridge at Arnhem. This distance was a compromise. Planners feared dropping closer would mean excessive casualties from anti-aircraft fire. But 8 miles is a long march, giving Germans time to react. Lieutenant Colonel Frost's battalion begins the march toward Arnhem Bridge at 3 p.m. on September 17. They move through Dutch countryside, passing cheering civilians offering food and flowers. Many Dutch believe liberation is at hand. But Frost pushes his men forward quickly. They must reach the bridge before Germans can organize defenses. Unknown to Frost and Allied planners, German forces near Arnhem are far stronger than intelligence suggested. The 2 SS Panzer Corps, including the 9th and 10th SS Panzer Divisions, are refitting in the area after earlier battles in Normandy. Though under strength, these are veteran armored units with tanks, experienced commanders, and combat-hardened soldiers. Not the demoralized remnants intelligence reports described. German Field Marshal Walter Model's headquarters is in Arnhem itself. When paratroopers begin landing, Model initially believes it's a raid to capture him. But German commanders quickly recognize this as a major operation. They begin moving forces to counter the airborne assault. By evening of September 17, Frost's battalion reaches Arnhem Bridge, the first Allied unit to reach a primary objective. They capture the northern end of the bridge. But German forces hold the southern end. Frost's roughly 750 men dig in around the bridge's northern approach, establishing defensive positions in nearby buildings. They expect XXX Corps to arrive within 48 hours. Meanwhile, the rest of British 1st Airborne Division encounters unexpected resistance. German forces block routes into Arnhem, preventing other battalions from reaching the bridge. Frost's force at the bridge becomes isolated. While Frost's force holds the Arnhem Bridge, XXX Corps begins its advance from the Belgian border. Lieutenant General Horrocks commands 30,000 vehicles, tanks, infantry carriers, artillery, and supply trucks advancing up a single highway through flat Dutch polder countryside. The advance is slow. German resistance is stronger than expected. Destroyed vehicles block the narrow road. Artillery fire disrupts the column. By evening of September 17, XXX Corps has advanced only 6 miles, far behind schedule. At Eindhoven, American paratroopers of the 101st Airborne wait for XXX Corps to arrive and cross the bridges they've captured. The delay is concerning but not yet critical. At Nijmegen, the 82nd Airborne faces a problem. The massive road bridge over the Vaal River is heavily defended. Germans have fortified the southern approach. Capturing it will require a major assault. Meanwhile, at Arnhem, Frost's isolated battalion prepares for what they now realize will be a longer fight than planned. German forces probe their defenses. Panzer units are gathering. In his later account, Major Tony Hibbert, one of Frost's officers, recalled, "We knew by nightfall of the first day that this wasn't going as planned. The rest of the division couldn't reach us." German resistance was far heavier than intelligence promised. But we held the bridge. Our orders were clear: hold until relieved. So we would hold. They didn't know they would hold for 4 days and nights against overwhelming force. September 18, the second day of Market Garden. At Arnhem Bridge, Frost's battalion faces increasingly heavy attacks. German forces bring up tanks, artillery, and infantry to assault the British positions. The paratroopers fight from buildings surrounding the bridge's northern approach, using anti-tank weapons and small arms to hold off German armor. Casualties mount. Supplies run low. Radio communications with division head. September 19, the third day. At Arnhem Bridge, Frost's battalion is surrounded and under constant attack. German forces use tanks to fire directly into buildings where paratroopers shelter. Flamethrowers are employed. Building by building, the defensive perimeter shrinks. Wounded accumulate in cellars with minimal medical supplies. Food and water run scarce. Ammunition dwindles. Still they fight. Frost himself is wounded by shrapnel. Major Freddie Goff takes command. The defenders know XXX Corps isn't coming on September 20 and 21, days 4 and 5. Frost's force at Arnhem Bridge. The final statistics of Operation Market Garden reveal a costly failure. Total Allied casualties exceed 17,000, 1,400 killed, 6,500 captured, and over 9,000 wounded. British 1st Airborne Division suffers the worst, 77% casualties, effectively destroying the division as a combat unit. American Airborne Divisions suffer over 3,500 casualties combined. XXX Corps loses hundreds of tanks and vehicles. German casualties are estimated at 8,000 to 10,000, significant, but they retained control of Arnhem and halted the Allied advance. The operation's failure had strategic consequences. Montgomery's promise to end the war by Christmas 1944 proved impossibly optimistic. Allied forces remained stalled at the Rhine throughout fall and winter. Germany gained months to strengthen defenses, continue war production, and develop new weapons. The Dutch population suffered continued occupation and, in the winter of 1944–45, experienced the Hunger Winter, severe famine caused by German reprisals and Allied inability to liberate the northern Netherlands. Thousands of Dutch civilians died from starvation. What went wrong? Post-war analysis identified multiple failures: intelligence failures to recognize German armored forces near Arnhem, overconfidence in German collapse, inadequate radio equipment causing communication failures, weather delays preventing resupply and reinforcement, the narrow single-road advance corridor making XXX Corps vulnerable to delays, dropping paratroopers too far from objectives, and fundamentally, a plan. The soldiers who fought Market Garden carried varied perspectives on the operation. American paratroopers of the 82nd and 101st Airborne generally felt they accomplished their missions, capturing and holding bridges at Eindhoven, Grave, and eventually Nijmegen despite heavy casualties. The failure at Arnhem wasn't their fault. XXX Corps commanders blamed impossible timelines, strong German resistance, and the narrow advance corridor. They argued the plan's fundamental assumptions were flawed. British 1st Airborne survivors felt pride in their fighting performance but betrayal by faulty intelligence and impossible missions. Lieutenant Colonel Frost, captured after the Arnhem Bridge battle, later wrote, "We were asked to do the impossible with inadequate support and inaccurate intelligence. That we held as long as we did is testament to British paratroopers' fighting spirit. But courage cannot overcome fundamentally flawed planning." General Roy Urquhart, who commanded 1st Airborne Division, spent decades defending his division's performance while criticizing the operations planning. Polish General Sosabowski, who had warned the plan was too optimistic, was scapegoated by Montgomery and British commanders who needed someone to blame. He was removed from command despite his forces fighting bravely. Field Marshal Montgomery never fully accepted responsibility for Market Garden's failure. In his memoirs, he claimed the operation was 90% successful because most bridges were captured. But the final bridge, Arnhem, was the only one that truly mattered strategically. Without it, the operation failed completely. The human stories from Market Garden reveal courage, sacrifice, and the cost of strategic miscalculation. At Arnhem Bridge, Frost's battalion fought one of the war's most determined defensive actions. Paratroopers held out for days against overwhelming force, following orders despite knowing relief was unlikely. Their stand became legendary in British military history. The 504th Parachute Infantry's Daylight River crossing at Nijmegen demonstrated extraordinary courage. Paddling canvas boats across 400 meters of open water under fire was near suicidal. Many did not survive the crossing. Those who did captured their objective despite severe casualties. Their valor couldn't compensate for the operation's strategic failures, but it showed what soldiers will endure when ordered. Dutch civilians paid a terrible price. Initial joy at apparent liberation turned to horror as heavy fighting destroyed towns. Arnhem was devastated. Thousands of civilians were caught in combat zones. The operation's failure meant continued occupation and the brutal hunger winter that followed. Approximately 20,000 Dutch civilians died from starvation between late 1944 and liberation in May 1945. German defenders also suffered. The SS Panzer divisions fighting at Arnhem and Nijmegen took heavy casualties. These were experienced soldiers fighting to defend their homeland's approaches. Many would not survive the war's final months. The battle was brutal for all sides. Operation Market Garden's legacy extends beyond its immediate military failure. Strategically, it delayed Allied victory in Europe by months. Resources devoted to Market Garden planes, supplies, ammunition, troops could have been used elsewhere. The operation consumed massive logistics while failing to achieve its objective. Some historians argue Market Garden actually prolonged the war. Tactically, it demonstrated the limitations of airborne operations. Paratroopers or lightly armed infantry dropped behind enemy lines. They can seize objectives quickly but cannot hold against armored counterattacks indefinitely without relief. Market Garden showed that overambitious airborne plans without guaranteed relief are doomed. It influenced how airborne forces were employed for the remainder of the war and beyond. The operation revealed intelligence failure's consequences. Ignoring or dismissing reports of German armor near Arnhem because they contradicted optimistic assumptions proved catastrophic. Confirmation bias in intelligence analysis can lead to disaster. Military institutions studied Market Garden for decades as a case study in flawed planning, overconfidence, and the dangers of complex operations with minimal margin for error. For the soldiers who fought there, Market Garden remained a defining experience. British 1st Airborne Division was rebuilt but never regained its former strength. American airborne divisions continued fighting through the Battle of the Bulge and into Germany. For all who survived, Arnhem Bridge symbolized courage in impossible circumstances, holding against overwhelming odds because orders demanded it, even when strategic value was lost. Today, Operation Market Garden is remembered as one of history's most famous military failures, a bridge too far, as Cornelius Ryan titled his definitive book on the operation. The Arnhem Bridge bears plaques honoring those who fought there. Annual commemorations gather veterans, their families, and Dutch civilians to remember the battle. The lessons of Market Garden remain relevant. Bold plans require realistic assessment, intelligence must be trusted over optimism, complex operations need margin for error, and courage cannot overcome fundamentally flawed strategy. For the soldiers who fought there, British, American, Polish, German, Dutch, the battle represented different meanings. For Allied paratroopers, it was courage and sacrifice in a losing cause. For XXX Corps, frustration at impossible timelines. For Germans, a desperate successful defense that bought time. For Dutch civilians, liberation delayed and terrible suffering. Field Marshal Montgomery's gamble failed. His promise to end the war by Christmas 1944 proved hollow. The war continued for 8 more months, costing hundreds of thousands more lives. Whether Market Garden could have succeeded under different circumstances remains debated. What is certain, as planned and executed in September 1944, it was doomed. The soldiers who fought and died deserve remembrance not for achieving victory, they didn't, but for enduring impossible circumstances with courage. Stories like Market Garden deserve to be remembered, not to glorify war, but to understand its costs, learn from strategic failures, and honor those who paid the price for command decisions beyond their control.